Basically like an old-fashioned vise or a clamp. So you can see he's working on, is that going to be a spatula? Yeah. There you go, he's going on a spatula, yeah. So he's got
just this one.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. So yeah, he's basically got his feet on those pedals there. That keeps this vise clamped down so he can work with his hands using something called a draw knife. Okay? Excellent. Ready to move through here, we're getting to our 17th century stonework. Basically, this is where all the meals were prepared. It was ran by a man named Ambrose Way. He was the cook at the time, providing 3 meals a day for 66 men in the village. Okay. Now, he was actually sick with tuberculosis while preparing the food. At the end of the day, it's still a deadly disease, but back then it was basically certain death. So if he's confident spitting all the food here and handing it out to his workers, they might get sick. Perhaps the priest contracts the disease. He goes to the local village and spreads from there. Okay. Smaller cows compared to the dairy cows we're used to, and they're from Normandy, France. Okay, so bringing them here, of course, was quite the journey. They were used mainly for their agricultural purposes, as their manure would enrich the soil, better grow the crops. They were also used for their dairy, as their milk was very fatty. Okay, but yeah, mainly for agricultural purposes. So bringing them here was quite the trek, as initially they brought through France, which was a 3-month journey to get just from France to Quebec City, and then from Quebec City getting here to St. Marie. It was a 30-day canoe trip with 50 portages where you have to basically carry your stuff to the next river, so 50 of those. And their canoes were actually full of holes in these cows, so you'd actually tie the cow's feet and blindfold it so it wouldn't work out, and you'd lay it down on the side of the canoe, and they were working on 2 sides. So if you go 5 or 6 feet wide though, and about 20 feet long, so it's much bigger than we're used to. But very strong, say words. I don't know how they actually got them in there. That'd be the most hard part. With the Jesuits for the state at the time.
Were the Jesuits for the state?
They would have been the priests.
Oh.
It was Christianity, not Catholicism.
So they would have slept and wrote their letters. Okay, again, those letters were important. All the Jesuit relations would be sent back to the Vatican in Italy, where the Pope was updated on what was happening here in St. Marie. So it took about a year and a half for that message to be sent back to the Vatican, and then a year and a half for the response to get back. So 3 years later, get your response, right? So,
I don't know, kids nowadays,
30
they can't
seconds.
live without their cell phone.
yeah,
Hopefully it wasn't an emergency.
Yes.
yeah, exactly, right? Yeah,
That's crazy.
yeah. So that's for
I meant the sending the mail.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, there's where 3 rooms where Father Bravo, Father Regado, and Father Lalo would have stopped. They're the 3 lead missionary priests. All these specific iron was done. It was ran by a man named Louis Gobert. He was the blacksmith at the time, and this shop was established in 1642. Okay, so again, making everything out of iron, but the iron itself is actually imported from France, as they have noted source iron here at the time. Iron was first discovered in Canada in the 1670s. It's been about 25 years or so before they discovered it. But in France, those ingots were smelted. The French took the most pure ones for themselves, took the rest over to Quebec City in about a 3-month journey, and then the leftovers, the scraps, came here to St. Marie, about a 30-day canoe trip, 1,200 kilometers, with again 50 portages, okay? So quite a bit of work. And it was the pig iron, so it was chemically impure, had a lot of non-metals in there, so it wasn't the best to work with, but it still did the job. They can make all their tools and equipment here. And the blacksmith himself, very, very skilled man. He was there for 10 years to become a master of the trade, okay? So he worked pretty well with it. And the local one that were to visit here, they had never seen iron before. They were used to using wood, stone, and bone to make their tools and equipment. So seeing something so dense and so tough, getting manipulated through heat, was astonishing to them. So he would give them gifts, maybe in the form of the arrowheads, fishing hooks, anything like that, to basically give them incentive to keep coming back and continuing to trade and learn with the French. Perhaps we could have also given them, let's say, one of those items and exchanged the one that could listen to them for each 3 hours or so. Okay? So it could be entertaining. When it came to actually smithing with the iron, in the far corner we have our hearth, a series of burning logs dropped in their wood coals. Okay. Now this is ash wood, so it's like a hardwood. The coals where it's dropping would not have been used by the French. They would have mostly been using charcoal, which is made using a different method. You have to use a pit kiln, where you basically smolder these logs and cover them with soil. You have a tunnel which gives it just enough oxygen, but it's to basically basically keep those vitalities of the wood from burning up completely. So you still have about 80% of the wood's energy in charcoal compared to 20%, which is in our wood coal. So still can get a pretty good amount of heat out of it, as the forge in between 900 and 1200 degrees Celsius. So wood coal still does the job, but charcoal is a bit better, you can say the least. So as you can see, those coals are in there. We're going to pull on that bellow, and it's going to compress it and push air through a pipe to superheat those coals. Get the forge up between 900 and 1200 degrees Celsius.
This must be brutal when it's hot.
Yeah, it doesn't pretty toasty here. That's,
Say I was last week.
Yeah, last week.
That's bellows double chambers. The bottom portion will first compress with an initial gust of air. The top portion slowly compresses, giving it a constant flow of air to make our jobs easier and prevent the cold being sucked back to that pipe, which causes a pretty nasty fire. Now, in those days, that bellow would have been single chambered, so you would have had your blacksmith working while his apprentice, typically like a 12-year-old boy, would be pumping that bellow all day to build up his muscles because he was also getting his apprenticeship then. So you build up your muscles for the first few years, and you start working on the iron later.
Check to see how bright it is.
Alright, so I'm going to show you guys how it works here. That's over 1,000 degrees right now.
So the way we're hitting it is kind of elongating it to make it a little bit sharper and longer, which is going to help us make a nail or an awl, which will help with the leather working that we do. And as we're hitting it, all that black slag is kind of flying off. All like the impurities from the iron. That's one of the things that they found in the ground in this area to kind of give us a hint that this could have been their blacksmith shop that they had here.
Exactly. Awesome. Right on. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. That's a great demonstration. Awesome.
That's impressive. Now, did you learn that here, or
Yeah.
are you majoring in this?
No, so I'm just a summer worker. So I just graduated high school. I just work here in the summertime.
Right on, and now you're making ironwork.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Put that on your resume.
For sure.
Any other questions about the blacksmith shop before we move on, folks?
No, this is cool.
This is very cool.
All right, we'll probably take off now. We're going to head to the next courtyard. So this was the north courtyard. We're going to head to the south courtyard now. Okay?
Older women.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay. I will add. These are built using the same style of construction that he used even 400 years ago. So the French were pretty advanced in terms of their construction. I know you guys mentioned one bath break. It's okay. I would think you guys right now then.
No, go ahead. I'm in no rush. I'm on holidays, so.
You guys know it. Those few minutes you guys have missed. Supplies the fort. In reality, that probably wasn't the case. It was actually a freshwater aquifer, which is like an underground spring that filtrates fresh water, which was leading down from where the martyr shrine was, and it came right through here. And it basically would have given them fresh water to maybe gather to drink. Perhaps, hopefully, they would dump waste downstream. They might even be bathed here, but the Frenchmen only bathed once per year because they believed that a layer of dirt and grime on your skin defended against disease, because they felt that basically miasma, which is called bad air, was disease in clouds that would enter through your skin and get you sick. So as long as you had that layer of dirt and grime, it would basically keep you from getting ill, right? Which obviously we know nowadays is not the case. So it might have built up their immune system, but if you got, let's say, a cut in your finger, that lets something in there, you get pretty infected, right? So not ideal. But that's just the waterway. This is actually the south courtyard, so this is where it all began. Began with number 19 there. That's called Enfilier, also called Enfillers. And that was built in just 6 weeks by 20 Frenchmen who first arrived here because they needed to find shelter as quickly as possible. So it was a 6-week build, very, very rushed. On the inside, it looks pretty decent. It has plaster on the walls, a big fireplace, flooring unit, but in reality, that would not have been there. It was those 20 Frenchmen on a third floor with a fire kitchen center and all their livestock in there with them. Okay, so it would not have been a pleasant experience, but it kept them nice and warm for those months. Once they were finished with number 19, though, they moved on to build number 21. This was they had their house for man, and a house for God. 21 was initially built to be a church named Enclavage. Was probably some form of residence. but in the archaeological digs in the 40s, they found a pair of scissors in the soil here, which led them to believe that they might have been cutting fabrics in this specific spot. Okay, so all clothing would have most likely been brought here, perhaps repaired using patches and sewing, but probably was just a residence in this specific spot. But it's good to call it a shoemaker and tailor shop because it gives you an idea, or it gives us an example of what they might have worn. So me and Mackenzie here, we represent French donné, or workers, laborers, typically people in Quebec City or in France who were down on their luck, might have needed a second chance in life, so they were offered food and shelter in exchange for work. So they basically come here and again, basically do the hard labor tasks, because the French Jesuit priests weren't allowed to do that. They had taken vows, which meant they weren't allowed to engage in hard labor, so that was up to the donné. Now, what we'd be wearing, me and Mackenzie have on our hats here, basically to defend against disease entering the top of your head. Those bad clouds of air, they felt the top of your head was most susceptible. As long as you wore a hat, you'd be able to safer. You also had your doublet, which is like your coat, more of a fashion style piece of equipment or clothing. You'd have your chemise underneath, which is like your undergarments. Typically, you probably wouldn't want this to be showing like I have it right now. This is typically called your underwear, but it's very, very hot out, right? So you guys don't leave your cabin open. The chemise could typically be used as a form of toilet paper, which is pretty gross. Again, we know the Frenchmen, they weren't exactly the most hygienic, right? So they didn't care as much, but moving on to the pants here, we've got the breeches. They're kind of like your pants, but as you can see, they don't go all the way down to my ankles. That's because in France, or in Quebec City, they had something called a chamber pot, which you basically go to the bathroom in. You dump it onto the street, unless you dump it out the window onto the street, it's going to make a big splash, right? You don't want that landing on your pants, so instead you have these high socks, which will absorb an impact for you, okay? So pretty gross. It's easier to clean your socks than it is your pants, right?
It's pretty shitty.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But depending on what you were wearing, it could also give an idea of how wealthy you were at the time. So if I'm wearing a fairly decent amount of dyes, like blue, red, purple was the most expensive, you could basically determine how wealthy you were. So dyes were hard to make, so that's what made them expensive. So if you had those dyes on, it could show how wealthy you were. The brighter the dye, or more fancy the dye, the more wealthy you were, okay? Same with how much material you wore. So if I had a lot of material for my breeches, for instance, I had a lot of extra material there, that would show that I could afford that extra material. Makes me a bit more of a wealthy man. Less material, less wealthy, right? So, awesome. Kenzie, could you give us an idea of the Wendat stuff?
Yeah, so as Gage explained, a lot of the French outfit is all about style and status and kind of how much money you have and being able to show it off. So when we look at the Wendat clothing that we're seeing around site 400 years ago and around this area, it's pretty much all about practicality. So even the things that might look quite fashionable, they do serve an important purpose. So for example, fringes on women's skirts, and also that you would find on men's pants. They're quite useful when you're working in those big cornfields like the Wendat people would have been doing. So when I walk, these fringes are kicking off of my legs, and they're kind of acting like how a horse's tail acts when there's a bunch of flies around, swatting away all the bugs.
That's just
So yeah, because when you're working in those big cornfields, you're maybe going to be encountering some ticks that you don't want to be stuck on your legs. Also, really helpful with mosquitoes in this area, which would have been quite prominent. So women are wearing skirts, men are wearing loincloths in the summer, and both of them are wearing pants and things as such in the winter time. In the summertime, you are wearing different clothing made out of deer leather, so deer skin, because it's a bit thinner, it's a bit lighter, and then in the winter time, you would wear something made out of moose or buffalo skin. So this jacket here is a good example of what might have been worn in the wintertime, and along with some furs and things as such to ensure some extra warmth. But this jacket here is made out of moose leather, very, very heavy. On their feet, they would be wearing moccasins during the summertime and big mucklucks during the winter. So these are mucklucks, not very designed. Of course, you'd have laces tying them up and things as such, but essentially just big winter boots, again, made out of a moose or buffalo hide. And then you have moccasins made out of deer, sometimes buffalo if you want to make them last a little bit longer. But this here, and you folks are welcome to pass it around if you like, is a traditional Wendat style moccasin. So a little interesting fact is that Europeans at this time period, when they're doing trade with the nations of this area, a good way of knowing which nation you were communicating with was by the style of their moccasins, because every one of them had a different style of moccasin. Today, we see a very generic, monolithic Ojibwe style in all of our trading posts and things as such, but at the time period, obviously, not everyone got together and said, let's do our shoes this way. So you've got quite a few different styles. Exactly. Right, exactly. So the Wendat people, they have quite a different culture, evidently, than the Europeans, and so they're not wearing any shirts in the summertime because it's so hot out here. So eventually, the chemise actually becomes a symbol of having converted to Christianity over the course of this 10 years in this missionary site, because the French care about modesty, and when they would visit site, they would ask the Wendat people to put on a chemise, and so eventually became quite symbolic. When you started wearing that all the time, you had converted to Christianity. Another thing that they would be using is this mantle up here. So it just goes across your back, and that's for when the women are working in the big cornfields all day, every day, to avoid a sunburn. And again, it has the fringes to flick away any bugs that might get onto your arms or your body.
I often wondered why the Aboriginal had them.
The fringes?
That's
yeah.
quite interesting.
Yeah, the indigenous peoples, that was their main purpose. It was also very useful for if, like, for example, you had to use a hair tie, you just took one off.
That is so nice.
That is.
When my hair tie breaks.
yeah, exactly.
Officers will be cleaned out.
Well, thank you, Mackenzie. That was pretty awesome.
Where did their material come from?
So,
The leather?
Oh, the material up there, where would they have used that?
Oh, I see. Yeah.
wool and linen. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because we sew, so I thought that they're not, they would have made their own linen material.
Yeah, it would have also been imported here, though, so it wouldn't have actually made it here, it would have been imported. Anything that was done here in terms of clothing would have been basically just fixing. Let's see, you had a hole in your jacket, you just patch it up for you, okay? So everything was imported, they would not be making it here. Yeah. But the one that, of course, be making their own clothing around here using that animal hides.
Well, they've been living here for this long, they know how to do it.
Plus, this is their home, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's head outside now. We'll talk about the saw trestle, which was used to construct their building. They were martyred, so they would take the bones to be holy relics, because they're very important in Christian faith, right? So they would burn the flesh, take the bones, okay? But this church itself, though, super important, as it was basically where the Wendat would be converted to Christianity. You had the chapel in the north quarter there, that was meant for just the priests, their private mass. This here was public, where the priests would conduct mass for any local Wendat who were staying here. There'd be one priest at the front conducting in Latin, one other translated into French for the Wendat here. Again, a lot of work, because the Wendat needed to be taught French first. Okay, so there's a lot of work going into this, but very important. Now, it's actually designed in a way that it includes both French and Wendat styles of construction. So you have a dirt floor here. Wendat weren't a huge fan of flooring, as they felt it was disrespectful to the tree spirit to be walking on top of boards, on top of trees, and it disconnected you from the earth by covering it up. Okay. They also have the longhouse style roof here, similar to indigenous winter homes called longhouses. Made it more familiar, more at home, right? They also took out the sacristy, which we saw in the chapel there. That was the changing room. When that felt if you elsewhere to change, it meant you were hiding something. So the French decided to take out that sacristy, put the robes on in front of them, show them that they had nothing to hide. Okay. One of the last things here would be the fireplace. Fireplace itself was typically deemed to be illegal in church at the time, because it felt that if you had a fireplace going or a fire going, and let's say a cold winter day, you're more focused on that fire than you would be of God. You had to be suffering to be closer to God, okay? So However, in those minus 40-degree days, the Wendat didn't like to be sitting here for 3 hours, listening to someone speak with something in a language they're unfamiliar with. So typically when the priest turned around after conducting mass, everyone was probably gone. So they knew in Wendat culture they also enjoyed fires because a fire lit in the building meant you were welcome. Okay, so they sent a letter back to the Vatican in Italy. It took about, again, 1.5 years to get there, requesting to have a fireplace put in place to make the Wendat feel a bit more comfortable, more at home. And it took 1.5 years to get back, so 3 years later they had their green light to build that fireplace. Might have been taken a few months, about 1 year to construct it, okay? So a lot of work, but it was kind of like a work in progress the entire time the site was here. But again, any Wendat who were visiting, they would come here and this is where they were converted. So this was one of the most important buildings on the site, French, right? Because this is where the purpose was basically to convert local Wendat, so this is where it was all done. We're going to move on back now. That's where the two saints, John and Mary Book and Gabriel de Lons, were buried.
No.
Okay, grab a seat if you'd like. It'll help you get out of the smoke, because the smoke line sits around head height. Grab a seat if you'd like. So, this is the Christian longhouse, basically a longhouse built by the French to replicate the longhouses which were winter homes for the Wendat people. Okay, this one acted like a hotel, so any Christian Wendat who were visiting here would stay here during the night, visit and trade during the day. Okay, there's a non-Christian longhouse with the non-Christian Wendat, which was down far into the site. It's a bit longer, looks more traditional. That was for any Wendat who were visiting here who didn't want to participate in Christianity, but were interested in trading and learning. Okay. Now, real longhouses were about 3 or 4 times longer than this one here, and again, used just for the winter time. So, of course, very, very smoky, very, very warm. You wouldn't want to be here during the summer because it mainly just used for storage, but super important as that smoke from those fires dried out and preserved all those corn meats and pelts, keeping the moisture away, preventing rot, mold, and bugs from getting to them. Okay. Now, whilst they were in here during the winter time, the longhouses could actually maintain a temperature of around 25 degrees Celsius, even in those minus 30-degree winters. So part of that had to do with the fact that the doorways were about half the height, so you'd actually have to crawl in here, and the smoke line would basically match up where those shelving units are. Okay. So the shelving unit was just meant for storage. You'd actually be sitting or lying down on the ground on one of those corn husk mats there, made of the husks of corn, and that would keep you out of the bulk of the smoke, because of course that's not very comfortable, and that smoke would act as a blanket. So it would retain heat, keep cold out, and again, try to preserve all your goods. Okay. Now, each fire pit was meant for a whole generation of a family, so you'd have the grandmothers first, her daughter, and then her granddaughter, and the men who came after in that same order. And each fire, again, was for a specific generation of a family, so you'd have probably about 3 in one longhouse, maybe this size, but again, they'd be about 3 or 4 times longer, so you'd have many, many fireplaces. It's a lot of fires burning, a lot of smoke, so important, again, to keep warm, but it wouldn't be very comfortable in the summer, because it gets very, very hot in here, even just with just one fireplace. Yeah. Any questions about our longhouse so far? No? You guys get up and take some photos if you'd like. We'll probably head into our hospital next. So yeah, if you guys want to decide, that's fine. If you guys just want to get comfortable, but on this dish here, and you would raise and lower it just like this. Let's say I wanted to illuminate my paper a bit better. If I was writing a letter, I could lower it myself, help illuminate that paper, and then if I wanted to illuminate more of the room, I could just raise it up, just like that, okay? So it's a pretty ingenious design, and that was their version of a light switch at the time. A dimming switch, I guess you could call it. Yeah. Excellent, right on. Well, is there anything else you guys wanted me to give you guys descriptions about. I can show you the lookout tower over here before we end the tour.
Sure, sure.
And then, if you guys want, you guys can kick off and explore more of the site, or I can lead you to the museum inside, which will give you more artifacts inside of it. So,
Okay.
It's gonna be cool.
Sounds good.
Це в госпіталі ще.
Irish Mountain Lookout. a donation.
Sign.
Guy's license plate.
Now this was a cargo carrier. Our main cargo was
Sweepstakes.
the sweepstakes hit some rocks in a storm about 7 miles north of here near Cova Island. And it sank out there in Cova. About a week later, they refloated it and towed it into the harbor here with the hopes of being able to they stripped anything of value. They took the masts out because those have value. They took anything metal off that they could. They emptied the cargo and it was allowed just to sit down. So it sits in about 20 feet of water. And the deck is about 10 to 12 feet. And it's completely intact. So when we get there, the stern or back of the boat will be on this side. The bow or front of the boat will be on this side. And you'll see the spots where the masts were stepped in place around those where the masts were going. You'll see squares where the cargo would have been loaded and unloaded. And right at the stern, there's a large opening which would have been the crew cabin. He does his circles, you'll see the water kind of smooth itself. And he will come around both sides.
Oh yeah.
So if we watch on one side, the water you may notice as you look down that there's sort of like metal grating put in place just inside those holes. I think lots of people like to come and snorkel almost so they just kind of fence it off, but lots of people will come and scoot on around up and down the sides.
Wow.
It's incredibly well preserved. The boat itself is made out of white oak. The white oak's incredibly resistant to rotting in the water. Between that and the cold water and the lack of algae and things in the water, it's been remarkably preserved. 10 to 12 feet. You're a little taller.
10 to 12 feet.
About 20. In general, it's down a foot or two from last year. A couple of years back, 2020, it would have been up over the tops of some of those boats. No, there's more climbing. They actually took the masts out.
Yeah. See all the
Two white ones. Wow.
It looks like a bit of a drone, but that's actually the photo.
Here's the mast.
Look at that.
So really you're not seeing what you're seeing. But that's where it sounds. water and moisture gets in, particularly in the winters when it freezes and expands. Makes more space for more water, more freezing expansion, of course. It's always changing. Just take a little note of the little cedar trees growing out of the sides of the rocks. We're going to talk more about those. But just they are
Yeah, the nose, got the mouth, got the hair.
Mm-hmm.
a good example of another one of the bluffs of the island right across here, another one around the other side there. And this way. Welcome to Bruce Peninsula National Park. This is our second of 2 national parks. Fathom 5 takes care of the water and all of the islands. Bruce Peninsula is the land and the shore. Right in front of us, we call this overhanging point. And it's a really great example of the different types of rock that the peninsula is made up of. If you look up at the top, you'll see a really solid, thick cap layer. That cap layer is called Gulf Formation Dolostone. And it's a specific type of rock that's very dense. It has that magnesium in it that makes it much harder, less resistant to erosion. And as you look down underneath it, you can see that brick type formation known as Eramosa Dolostone. The Eramosa Dolostone formed with sediment mixed into it, so that's what forms those sort of brick shapes, and it makes it a bit more susceptible to erosion and erosion. And right out to the top of that, if you go a little bit past the grotto, 15 minutes, you'll come right out to the top of that opening. Just around the corner here behind me, we're going to see a little grotto that is being formed. Grotto being Italian for sea cave. So there's one right here that's forming. So as the wind and the waves get pushed in there, eroding that softer rock underneath. One of our guys is just a couple of minutes, we're going to be coming up to the grotto. We're going to move in really slowly because there'll probably be people swimming in the water. Captain Terry will get us as close as he can. You'll be surprised how close we'll actually get. But I just want to caution and ask everybody just to remain seated while we're moving in there.
Yeah.
Pretty much got to be on your foot to get down that.
Mm-hmm.
La plage jusqu'à côté. Mais ça, c'est vraiment le. Ben non, non, on y va. Ça prend 45 minutes, on part à l'heure du site, fait qu'on est là à 9h, 9h, moins de monde, tout est. Ça fait de midi à 4h, si vous voulez faire non. Parce que moi, je suis en autre.
Non, non, ben ça,
C'est vraiment nice. Tu sais, comme j'aurais quasiment aimé pour faire des plus belles photos, ça avait moins de monde.
ouais. C'est ça de même.
Non, mais de l'extérieur.
On n'a pas un sac en plastique pour ça.
Non, j'aime.
On aurait pu nager jusque-là pour faire la photo de l'extérieur.
Non.
Le choc thermique. Pour les muscles aussi.
That's good. I don't hear that. So it's an interesting example of big boulders that come off and if you like jigsaw puzzles, you can sort of see how this one would
Oh non, là, juste dans le
Ouais, hein?
on fait de la reine de bord.
Là, on nage, puis on fait ça. Regarde,
On fait de l'escalade, puis on
on peut
s'assoit.
même se mettre ici. Bon, ouais, mais ça, c'est cool. Mais ici, ici. Peut-être ici, ça va.
Amazing.
As we come around the corner, see small ones smell like water and then right beside it is a This little spot right in here is actually a much nicer place. If you're hiking out to the grotto, just before you get to the grotto, there's a trail on to the right. It'll bring you right out to this area. It's nice and smooth. You can come down, there's some black rocks, so you can nice and swim. And there's hardly like 100 meters. Some people are always curious about why the water is the color that it is. And we have these incredibly beautiful waters here. And it's kind of two factors. The first one is when light hits water, it refracts differently. So it hits the water, the darker colors, the reds, the purples, are absorbed very quickly by the water. The greens and the blues are refracted like that. With the dolostone that comes off the escarpment, it's actually very white rock. So as it gets into the water, there's a nice white background to the water. So between those two things,
like to get down.
Mm-hmm.
You're sweating when you come down. Get cooled off. By the time you get back up, you're ready to go back in the water.
You can also see some examples of some of our vegetation starting to form. So we get these boulder beaches coming up. The beaches, the boulders start to get pulverized. Some organic material gets trapped, decomposes, makes a nice little